Okay, so start at the very beginning, because as Julie Andrews said, that's a very good place to start. This is the second of the talks on photography on your device. This one is looking at editing and the ways that editing can be done and how they can improve your photograph. Now, the reason that I've started off with that photograph on the title page is that the sun when I took that photograph was too bright. So I just painted a little bit of darkness on the clouds to make it look a little bit more dramatic. My rule for photo editing is that in 95% of the cases, as little as you can do is right. The more you do, the more contrived it can look, and the more likely you are to make a mistake. So what we're going to have a look at, well, we're going to look at the various types of editing. The first type we're going to look at is fixing errors in an original photograph. Anyone that's taken 100% perfect photographs without making a mistake is a genius. Or Cartier-Bresson, who was a genius. The way that your eye works and the way that your camera works can be very different. So sometimes you want to change the photograph to make it look like the way that you think you saw it. And then finally, a very little bit about artistic edits. Some people, and particularly see that with photographers who are on some of the Edinburgh groups on Facebook. To my eye, they're going over the top with loads and loads of edits. Doesn't make it right or wrong, it's to my eye. And there's a very good example in fixing original errors. That was a nice photograph, but it was far too dark, and the lovely detail of the plants was completely lost. So, the simple things. The first one we're going to look at is crop and rotate, and I'm going to try and explain those terms as we go. White balance, brightness, and then other things. Most of this is going to be about the basic things, but just a wee bit of the advanced stuff, because the advanced things actually are dead simple to do. So, cropping. That is the name for cutting off stuff at the edges, and that logo in variations across different platforms, desktops, whatever, that is the crop logo. And the reason it's called that was in the good old days, we used to take a print and guillotine it to get it, the way we wanted, taking off lampposts at the side, or a fence line that got between you and the subject, just cropping it off. And rotating. Anyone who's not taken photographs where the sea or the loch was running off at one side or another is, again, really quite talented. When you're doing something quickly, even if you're using the grids that I talked about in the last talk 2 weeks ago, it's still frighteningly easy to end up with the horizon not being horizontal. So I'm going to play a little video now, and it's showing you you can see how badly off the horizon is on that photograph. So I'm just going to show you a little video of me editing that. Hit the edit button, choose the crop and rotate, and as you see, as you pull the slider, you can actually change the horizon back to horizontal. Now I'll do that again so you can see it. Edit mode, choose the tool you want, and then that dragging the slider at the bottom is how all of these tools work, because it gives you a lot of flexibility, and you end up with the horizon horizontal. It makes life a lot easier when you can do things like that. So the next thing is making things look as I saw it. And we're going to walk through these tools one by one. I'm going to for almost all of them, I'm either going to show you photographs of what these tools do, or I'll play a little video of me playing with these. Where you've got two photographs side by side, I have borrowed those from the iPhone photo school, and I'll get Katie to put the link to them in. They do a series of excellent training videos, in fact, training sessions. Some of the material is free, but like everybody else, they would encourage you to pay, you know, and take part in some of their classes, but they are really good. I've been a member for years and found them exceptionally useful. The first thing though, and I said this last week and I'll say it 2 or 3 times today, the first thing is you on your phone or your iPad, duplicate the photo. If you mess up and accidentally save something you've messed up, you can lose your original. So duplicate it, and then on one copy, play around with it. So that if you completely foul it up, you can just delete the wrong one and go back in. What you can very often find, and again, it's different on different devices, is that you can actually go back a step, undo what you've done, so that if you have made a mistake and you're halfway through editing something, you don't have to go back to square one. You just hit the goodness me key, go back and try again. So the first one is exposure. And this is the term that most people are aware of. You hear about things being overexposed or underexposed. Exposure is getting the camera to give the right amount of light and shade to something. And this is where I think something very, very important needs to be said. The human eye and the way that our brains work, you do not realize quite how clever that all is. If you were looking at that sunflower with the sun on your face, apart from feeling the sun on your face, your eye would be able to cope perfectly well with how dark the seed head on the sunflower was. But if you looked up to the sky, all the clouds would be perfect as well. And your eye is automatically adjusting the focus so you can see close or far away. And it's also adjusting the amount of light that's letting in. But if you look at a camera trying to do the same thing, it's either or. It's either focused on the distance or close. It's either giving you the light from the shadow or the brightness. And it's only when you look at a photograph and you think, that's not what I saw. Well, it is actually what you saw, but your eye and your brain are fooling you into thinking that all of it is at the same level. Getting the exposure right is best when you take it originally. And if you remember 2 weeks ago, there was a couple of examples I gave you of touching on the screen and getting the right exposure so that things work properly. Now, what I would suggest is that you do the touching on the screen a fair bit, and it's better to underexpose than overexpose. In other words, it's better to have your picture slightly dark than too bright. Because if it's slightly dark and you edit it, you can get a lot of the detail out of the dark bit. If it's too bright, it's called burned out, and you really can't recover the detail out of that the same way. And I would also say, adjust a fairly small amount. Playing around with exposure, you can end up with all kinds of excitements in your photographs. The next control is called brilliance. And what brilliance does is and they're all playing with light levels. Brilliance either brightens shadows or darkens highlights. So if we take an example, doing very little, Here's a photograph, inevitably, of that famous gardener's cottage in Princess Street Gardens. If I brighten it, to me, that completely loses its, the story in it. That's just overexposed. But if I darken it, all of a sudden it's quite moody. And if I took out the background, you're almost moving into Hansel and Gretel territory. So a little bit of playing with brilliance can give you a lot of nice results, because it's only looking at one end or another. And it's slightly different to playing with highlights or shadows. And again, play with them and see for yourself how they work for you. What the highlights does is it only looks at the bright areas, and it changes that what's in those very bright areas. And the shadows, it's actually working only in the dark areas. So you can pull detail out of shadows, or put something into shadow that wasn't before. Very powerful and very easy to get wrong. There's a photograph that I took at midnight of the basin at Kirkwall Harbour. If I push the bright areas, isn't that horrible? It was a half decent picture, but by putting too much brightness in it, I've just made it flat. I've lost the colour from the sky. And 2 weeks ago, we were talking about what happens with sunsets. But when I do it the opposite way and push into the shadows, all of a sudden, do you see the difference in the sky and the reflection and the boats? And all I did was I just played the tiniest bit with the highlights and shadows tool to get those two changes. Contrast. Now, I'll try and explain contrast. Contrast is one of those things that was never possible on old film cameras, because with contrast, your phone is going over the whole picture and looking for edges. So if it finds the edge of a tree or a face or a child's toy or whatever, it finds that edge, and it makes a very subtle difference in the brightness between the two. So it adjusts the way that the picture comes forward. Now, I hope you're all going to see this when I do it. This is a photograph of the canal, obviously during lockdown at the time of year when we still had algae on the canal. And I'm going to show you what happened. I just touched the contrast and no more. Now, do you see that change? It's subtle, but it's not quite the same story. It changes across the board, and the reflections come out very nicely. It can be nice to do. Too much contrast, and you end up with it looking visually uncomfortable. The edges get too defined. Everything just looks contrived. Brightness. Making the whole image lighter or darker. So it's not just working on edges or on dark areas or light areas. And there's an example from the iPhone photo school of what happens when you change the brightness slider. And if you look at the cloud and you look at the cloud furrows, they are quite different. And it's simple as that. Your eye looking at that, when you look at the clouds, your eye is looking in the distance, and it copes with the level of brightness. The plants in the foreground, when you look at it, your eye automatically adjusts, and you're not aware that the sky actually is completely different, because you can't see what you're not looking at. But the camera, unfortunately, looks at the whole frame and does try and do that. What's interesting is, while the left-hand picture looks better, to me, the sky and the furrows are better, I look at the plants in the bottom right along the border, and to me they're better in the right hand of the two images. So brightness does good things, but it doesn't necessarily only do good things. The next control is black point. And again, this is something that you don't realize your eye is doing, because your eye is always adjusting so that you can see as much as possible. But the black point says, okay, whereabouts is actually black in this photograph? And from there, it then calculates everything else. And you don't realize how much computation is being done on your phone. But by changing the brightness of the dark point, you can make something more or less moody, more or less visible. It needs a lot of care, but you've duplicated your photograph. Of course, you've not forgotten to do that. You play with it, and if you don't like it, you just bin it. So I was walking to the Lyceum, and for those of you that know where that is, it's the back lane that leads you to the front of the Lyceum, because it's the shortcut if you're coming from Toll Cross. And it was one of those cold nights. The central heating was on in a lot of the offices and buildings, which is where all the steam comes from. There's aircon on in some of the offices. So I thought, okay, let's see what happens when I play with the black point in that. And in one shot, I completely destroy it by moving the black point the wrong way. In the other shot, you notice how some of the detail just disappears in, because I've said this is where black is, and by moving it, everything that's close to black gets darker. And all of a sudden, it's a completely moody shot. It's not a great shot, but it's there. And it's a nice, easy one to use. Saturation. This is the one that people can overdo. It makes just the colors. It's not changing the brightness of the picture. It's changing the amount, the blueness of blue, the yellowness of yellow, and it just changing those colors there. And there's again from the iPhone Photo Academy. That's what happens when you just play with saturation. In one, the lighthouse is there and the sky is worse, and the other one is probably gone too far. The sky is too blue. But it's a simple tool to use, and just tinkering with something can give you some quite nice results. So that's saturation. The next one is vibrance. And this is again something that was completely impossible to do in the good old days. Because what vibrance says, if a color is quite strong, don't touch it, or don't touch it very much. If it's a skin color, don't touch it, or don't touch it very much. But if there's something that's been muted, like plants in a background or something else, they will get pushed a little bit depending on how much vibrance you put in. It will not touch any color that's very strong unless you really push it. But there's an example now. At first you look at it and because your eye, like my eye, we always look at people's eyes first when you're looking at a picture. It's the way that we look at people. But look at the background. Without making any real change to the skin tone of the girl, the trees have completely changed color, and then you realize that the pullover is slightly different. It's, the tone of that has changed a bit as well. But equally, in the one on the left, you'll notice the skin has gone there's a little bit less detail on the skin. So vibrance allows you to make subtle changes to make a picture more vibrant, which is where the name came from. It's a nice tool used in conjunction with other ones. It can give you quite a bit of flexibility. The warmth and tint, and sometimes these names on different phones or tablets, these names are slightly different. But what it does is it will take the whole picture, every single color in the picture, and make them either warmer, in other words, more orange, or cooler, more blue. And that can be handy. Again, here's a very good example. Picture on the left, it's almost a black and white, isn't it? But the one on the right with the blueness in it, it actually does feel colder. But it's by gentle adjustment of that, if something like a sunset, which is example again we had 2 weeks ago, when you play with the warmth, you can actually bring the color back into the sun that your eyes saw, but the camera muddles up because it's always trying to work out to get a nice average picture. And there's one word you cannot use for a good sunset, and that's average. Particularly with this strange thing called white balance, what your camera is trying to do is to find what something white is. So if you're holding a sheet of white paper in the middle of that photograph, it's trying to work out what that white is. But if there's no sheet of white paper in that photograph, it's going to look for something. And in the case of the snow, it's going to say, well, that must be white. And of course, snow isn't. Sharpness and definition. And again, we've sort of touched on a variation of this before, but sharpening makes the edges more defined. It can be very useful, but boy, it can completely foul an image up if you go too far with it. I will show you a little video. I was out at Jupiter Artland last summer. If you haven't been there, it's well worth a walk through it. Actually, it's an excellent day out. Sharpening can do a lot of nasty things, and it can sharpen up any errors in clouds. If your camera is quite aggressive in the way that it deals with, for instance, areas of a single color, like clouds or sky, and you sharpen it, all of a sudden it looks like you've got a sky of flying saucers. So, a photograph of a statue, not a particularly great photograph, it's of a rather nice statue, but I'll show you what happens when we edit it. That's the sharpen tool. Now watch what happens to the statue. See, it goes from being nice to being almost like a cartoon. And somewhere in the middle of that, there's the right sharpness setting. And I'm not going to say what I think it is, but I'll play that video again just so you can see it. And you'll notice that what is the right sharpness for the grass is not the right sharpness for the head of the statue. It cannot fix an out of focus photograph. It can, a very little of it can make it look less bad, but a photograph that's out of focus will always be out of focus. So all the stuff you see on the the crime series and TV where they enhance pictures and they can identify faces and number plates, using magic software. Actually, no, they can't. Not possible. We're getting close to the stage that it can be more accurate, but it's not possible. If you take a photograph in a very dull area, you'll notice that there's what looks like dust or mottling on your image, and that is called low light noise or just noise. It's caused by the fact that the sensor in your camera, when it's very dark, there's actually more voltage given to the sensor in order to detect, to detect things, to detect any detail in it. But that extra voltage going to the sensor causes the sensor to heat up slightly, and it can actually detect itself, and you can end up with all sorts of things. And the number of times that I see haunted house photographs, and you think, all right, low light noise, and they've sharpened it. Yeah, we can all do that. But now you know where it's all coming from. You've just got to be careful of it, basically. And the other thing is that if you're dealing with noise reduction, it can remove things like skin tone, and you end up looking like it's a Star Trek android rather than a person. Nobody's skin is perfect, but too much noise reduction and you end up with absolute horrors. We've talked about white balance. Camera will do the best it can with it. That's really all I can say. 95% of the time, the white balance that your phone or tablet will take a photograph of is good or very good. And then there's the exceptions. Snowfields, sunsets. If you're in a building which has got very coloured walls, fashionable purple or green walls, and they put a cast on the skin, it's going to assume that green is white, and all of a sudden you're going to end up with some interesting results which you'll have to try and adjust in your editing. So keep on coming back to sunset because it is the most difficult one. I've got a little video here, and what rather than do what I would normally do, and that's just use one or at most two of the tools in order to adjust that, I thought, let's be a naughty boy and let's play with all of the tools that we've just showed you and let you see them working together. It's not a great photograph to start with. That's the first mea culpa. And the second is that I would never do all these things to one photograph anyway, because each time you edit it, you're changing it, and the compound result can be quite unexpected. But it's just to show you all the tools working at once. There is no magic rule. Your eyes are different to mine. Your camera is different to mine. Your editing device is different to mine. So I cannot say, put this down 5 notches, put that up 2 notches, and it will be perfect. Because the one thing I can guarantee is that is 100% wrong. It is definitely a case of what works for you works. So here's a photograph of a sunset in edit mode. First of all, let's look at playing with exposure. Then the brilliance. And you see how the details coming and going in the seascape. Looking at the highlights now. And then the shadows. See the difference the smallest touch of contrast makes. Your eye in looking at that would be either blinded by the sun or wouldn't notice the colors. And as you can see, it's now getting silly with the amount of adjustments I've made. So that's what I ended up with. That's what I started up with. It's different. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's a bit more like I saw. I don't like what I've done to the sea. But by playing with the tools, and you look at the picture as you're doing it, and you think, that's better or that's not better. And you will come to 2 or 3 of these editing tools that you like to use, and you'll come to half a dozen that you can't be bothered with, and that's fine. It's the exact same thing. There is no right way of doing any of this. Artistic edits. And I'm going to be slightly careful on this. I personally, I don't do a lot of the arty side of it, so I'm you know, I've got a slightly biased point of view. But that picture of one of the standing stones on Machty Moor and Arran, if you don't know it, there's a little extra saturation on it, and then I have sharpened only the stone, because it just allowed me to bring out a bit of the detail in the stone. And if you look at the right-hand edge of the stone, you'll see there's a little bit of an artifact. It's not quite right, but initially you look at it and you think, yeah, that's not bad. And it's the point where you're moving from photography to art. And there comes a point, in fact, where the modern photographs, heavily edited, I would say were digital art rather than photographs, even though they all start on the camera. It's very easy to do. Sometimes the results can be really superb, but equally it's very easy to do badly. And I'm going back to that Facebook group, the Lost Edinburgh one. And I will admit that some of the pictures that people are putting up there, I'm impressed by, but it's an awful lot of effort to actually, you know, end up with a piece of art. So here's one photograph that I took of the hub. It's a time exposure, as you can tell, with the lady in the front who's currently making bread in the room next door. But you can see it's, you know, it's a time exposure, a lot of typical atmospheric Edinburgh evening during the festival, and a lot of cloud around, and you'll also see there's a lot of noise in it. We'll come back to dealing with that noise maybe later on, but the edges are just not quite right. Then I turned around the other way and pointed at the castle, because it was all lit up for the tattoo, and it was quite pretty as well. And the editing in that, well, none. I actually made sure the camera took those pictures as it was, because I chose, by touching on it, I chose where the camera was taking its light reading, its focus, and its color from. So you've got control of it. So the first editing, I would always say, is when you're taking it, because very often you might not need to do anything at all. So we talked earlier on about what happens if you want to remove a fence post or whatever. Painting out, as it's called, and in the old days, literally, you used to sit with snowpeak or whatever on a negative and get rid of it. These days, your £3 app will do it for you. And there's Retouch, Snapseed, Reflect, there's dozens of them. I use Retouch and Snapseed a fair bit because you can get rid of something on the picture that you can't get rid of when you've taken it. So quick and dirty, photograph a fisherman. Take a brush, paint out what you want, hit go, and he's gone. Notice the mistake. His fishing rod is still there. I'll do that again. But it's as simple as object removal, brush, go. Now, there's other tools there. You can erase things, you can make a smaller brush, all those things, but that is a quick and a very, very easy way of, removing detail from a picture that you don't want. The other thing that you can do is you can move something from one part of an image to another. So if somebody is facing the wrong way, copy them from the wrong side to the right side and then paint them out in the first side. And believe me, that will take you a lot longer than you think, because you'll keep on spotting artifacts and mistakes as you do it. But it's amazingly simple. And again, duplicate the picture, play with it, and eventually you'll get something you like. So you can clone details in pictures. I do a lot of work bringing back old black and white photographs. We've got family photographs taken back to the 1880s. Unfortunately, I can't show you them because I don't have family permission to do it. But these old photographs, they weren't stored particularly well. And there's a bit of damp, and maybe there's a little bit of mildew on them, and there's cracking on it and whatever. But with a bit of tender loving care, you can get it back to what it was originally. And in the case of a couple that I've done, actually better than the originals, because the originals were in these tiny black and white pictures. If they are properly scanned in a good scanner and worked on, you can get detail out of it that you can't see from the naked eye, because the detail is there in that wonderful old black and white print. And unfortunately, all that got lost later on when we moved to color. You can emphasize colors, you can tighten up faces. You'll have noticed that very possibly your camera can actually recognize faces, but can also recognize people. It can actually identify from shape of face and the biometrics using the same sort of software as allows your passport to be recognized. Can actually know that that's you, and that's Jimmy, and that's cousin Ethel, and whatever else. And you can suddenly start to create albums of these people without having to identify who they are in pictures, because the software can do it. You can add reflections to things, which can be quite handy and quite pretty and artistic. And you can fix perspective. You know, the converging verticals thing where you're looking up at the top of a building or whatever, and the top is narrower than it should be. Again, you can fix that perspective using some of these editing tools. Plus, all these extra apps, they do something similar to what your free Google or Android or iPhone editing can do. And here's an example of a photograph. Every single bit of that is edited. The island with the lighthouse was in shadow. I painted the sunlight on it by changing the color slightly. The clouds I have darkened. The sea in front, see that lovely reflection of the island there? Completely faked in. There's an app called Reflect, and all you have to do is to drag your horizon to it and say, okay, everything above that is to be kept, everything below it is to be reflected. How much shadow there is, how big the waves are, is there sunlight on it? And I would defy anyone to spot the mistakes in it, because there's 2 or 3, but that took me maybe 5 minutes to do. Out of a very poor picture of that island, but I was so annoyed with myself for having been there and screwed the picture up that I thought, I'm going to try and fix it. So there's this tiny little bit in the middle, which is the island, which is genuine, and even the colours in it are wrong. So, in summary, and going back to what the sort of thing that I was saying last week, go onto the website of your supplier, Apple, Samsung, Google, whatever, and watch their free videos, because they will have loads of them. There'll also be tons and tons of them on YouTube. You could probably spend the rest of this year watching nothing but free videos on YouTube that tell you about editing photos. Duplicate the picture that you've got. Keep on saying that, don't I? Duplicate the picture and then experiment. Play with the tools. See what they can do. See what you like. And you'll maybe come across issues that, that the camera on your phone or your tablet is doing strange things and you're having to work around them in a different way. All of these photographs that are taken will have flaws in them. Digital cameras make mistakes. They have flaws. I was talking to somebody just last night about the new phones that are coming out, and there was a professional photographer who I follow on YouTube, and he was saying everyone thought it was amazing when the first iPhone brought out a 2 megapixel camera and could take photographs, and they were soft and the colors were rubbish, but it was a phone that took photographs. The most modern phones are cameras that also make phone calls. And you just need to look, for instance, at how Apple a couple of weeks or 3 weeks ago now launched the new iPhones. All they were talking about was the camera and photography, and how, and all the technology behind it was how to make your photographs better, because that's what's changed. And the ability to take photographs in environments you could never do before, to do things that with my expensive camera kit, which sits in the wardrobe, and it does sit in the wardrobe these days, and it's still an expensive camera kit. I cannot replicate with my expensive camera kit what I can do in my phone. Every photo you take is different. It will be of different subjects, different focus, different contrast, different colors. Every phone is different. Even if you're comparing a Samsung Galaxy to the previous version of Samsung Galaxy, they will have different results taken of the same thing. There's differences in every generation of iPhone. There's differences if you're using LG or Huawei rather than Samsung. They all respond differently. Even if they're using the same lenses and sensors, which they're not, because they are now using so much computer power in the background to deal with them. The net result is that when you add in the fact that you're different and none of you are going to want your photographs to look like mine, why should you? You can probably do 10 times better, but you'll want your pictures to be different. You'll prefer different, a different story to be told in your photograph. And the net result is the only way you're going to know what suits is to play around.